Tools for talking. That's racist. That's sexist. Hi, I'm Mike Moskalo. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to resist the urge to label when we are engaged in difficult political discussions, especially those that surround racism, sexism, or any of the other isms that we often talk about. So, that's racist. That's sexist. You're racist. You're sexist. These are fighting words. They don't describe the other person. They characterize the other person. They're interpretations. They are characterizations of the other persons. This is not helpful in a political discussion. Try to avoid interpretive labels. Instead, describe particular acts. Instead, I'll show you what I mean. Let's look at abstract characterizations versus concrete descriptions. So in a political discussion, we might say, that's sexist. That is an abstract characterization. It's an interpretation of some sort of an event that has occurred. A concrete description would be simply a description of the actual event itself in the most concrete terms possible. He whistled at the woman who was walking by. They're very different. Abstract characterizations are interpretations. They tend to evaluate, they tend to characterize, they tend to generalize, blame the other, most importantly, impugn the other's character. That's why they're called characterizations. They shame the other, and as a result, they lead to difficult interactions because the other becomes defensive. Concrete descriptions are simply observations. They tend to be more neutral, describe acts and events, not people. They focus on particulars, concrete particulars. They're open to alternative interpretations, and they are silent about the other person's character. As a result, they allow each person in interaction to save face so that an actual discussion can take place. Now, this is not to suggest that he whistled at her, that when he did that he was not being sexist. He may, in fact, well have been being sexist. The argument here is that it's not a helpful thing in the context of a problem-solving conversation to label it as such because of these problems right here. Note that he whistled at her. He may have whistled at her for many, many reasons. He may have whistled at her because he was catcalling and being sexist. He may have whistled at her because he knows her and they have a joke together. He may have whistled at her for many, many different reasons. Maybe he thought that she was in danger of some sort, but we won't know that until we talk to him. And even if we talk to the person and find that the person is sexist or is using a sexist motive, this is not a very helpful way to have a conversation. Let's discuss abstract characterizations and concrete descriptions by exploring the distinction between the abstract and the concrete. It may seem very simple, but in many ways it's not. So let's contrast abstract and generalizing statements to concrete and descriptive statements. Let's start in a non-political context. Let's start with the abstract concept of kindness. Let's define it. We can define it abstractly. Kindness is doing something in someone else's best interest, even if you don't expect anything in return. It's abstract. Why is it abstract? It's abstract because it has no concrete content. It is an intangible. The doing something in someone else's best interest could be anything. Even if you don't get anything in return, the anything in return can be anything. You can't imagine any of the terms in this abstract definition. You can't imagine abstract kindness. You can, however, imagine concrete examples of kindness. You shared your lunch with Joe when he didn't have one. You helped your grandmother learn to use a computer. You paid for the next person's donuts in the drive-thru yesterday. Each one of those are concrete and descriptive rather than abstract and characterizing. Another example, a little bit more difficult, slob. Not caring about tidiness, neatness, or appearance. Again, the term slob is more abstract. It is characterizing. It's an interpretation. Um, if we call somebody a slob in a conversation that's supposed to be a problem-solving conversation, we're not going to get very far. But we might get further if by slob, or we meant he ate pizza on the couch, or the dishes are in the sink, or the room has not yet been cleaned. Each one of those might be a more concrete example of that which we might call an act of someone who we call a slob. But if we say, you ate pizza on the couch, or you left dishes in the sink, or that even more neutral, the dishes are in the sink, we get our point across in a concrete and descriptive way without characterizing. Another example, steal. Seems like a pretty reasonable concept we should all be able to understand, but it's still abstract and characterizing. Taking something that doesn't belong to you might be called stealing. Now, concretely, stealing is different in each of these situations. If I'm robbing a store, charging 23% credit card rate, or raising taxes. We could say that if we say that the government is stealing my money, or the credit card company is stealing my money, and if we were in a conversation with the government or a government official or a credit card agent, stealing is not going to get us very far. Each of these is a more concrete description of the events that we refer to when we speak of stealing. We could say that person robbed the store. This credit card company charges 23%. My government raised my taxes by 10%, or what have you. That's concrete and descriptive. Stealing is abstract and characterizing. Let's get more political. Sexist. Belief that one gender or sex is superior to another. Actually, there's very different definitions of sexism. Discriminating on the basis of sex, or a system of advantage based on sex. Again, each one of those is very abstract, and we can, instead of calling someone sexist in a problem-solving situation, we might describe the actual behaviors that we are interested in. Weinstein raped her, had sex without her consent. That is a description. You whistled at her as she went by. If I want someone to stop whistling, it's going to probably be better if I talked about the specific behavior, whistling, rather than simply calling the other person sexist and hoping that the shame is going to change the other person's behavior. Shaming rarely changes other people's behavior. How about the example of James Damore, who was fired from Google when he wrote a piece about engineers and gender. It's okay if there are fewer women at Google than men. Imagine that he said in his piece. Is that an example of sexism? He argued that had much to do with the interest of males versus females in engineering and the like. So if we want to change the practices at Google, instead of using the word sexist necessarily, if we say there are more men than women at Google, and then begin to explore why that is the case, we are more likely to have a more effective problem-solving discussion than if we use abstract and characterizing terms. Same with racist. Racist, a belief that one race is superior to another, discriminating on the basis of race, a system of advantage based on race. That's the abstraction. We can say that a culture is racist or a person is racist. Boy, and when we do that, we characterize the entire person or culture or system in question. One might argue that there is a difference between saying that the United States is a racist nation versus saying that there is rampant racism in the nation, or that there's a history of racism in the nation, or that there are many racist institutions. Those are all different terms. Racist is a fighting term. And again, it's not to say that there's not racism. It's how do we talk when we're in a problem-solving situation. When we begin to call the other racist, or a culture racist, or the like, we may be getting ourselves in a defensive power struggle that it's going to be very difficult to extricate ourselves. Better to say, rather than you're racist, you went to a KKK rally. Many of us will agree that that's racist, maybe even the KKK person, him or herself. But it's much better to talk about the concrete and descriptive rather than the abstract and characterizing. You accepted an application with the white-sounding name, but rejected the one with the black-sounding name, even though they were identical. Now, if I'm talking to a business owner and I see that the business owner has done this, I can call the business owner racist, try to shame the business owner into changing his policies. More likely, we'll get the person's back up and cause defensiveness. If I simply describe the behaviors in question, I'm much more likely to be able to have a conversation. And again, the term racist is rather unclear, ambiguous in many ways. There are fewer black and Latino CEOs than white ones. Let's say that we make that statement. Is that racist? Is that not racist? Is the mere fact of difference meaning that there's a racial problem? Maybe, maybe not. But again, the point is not whether it's racist or not racist. It's that when we use these terms in a discussion, we are much more likely to have a difficult, polarizing discussion than if we're able to get more concrete and descriptive and describe actual events and the reasons why they occur. So again, abstract characterizations tend to be to evaluate, characterize, generalize, blame, impugn, and shame. Concrete descriptions, because they are more neutral, they describe acts and events rather than characterize people. They focus on particulars. They are therefore open to alternative interpretations. You're silent about the other's character. You allow the person to save face so that now you can influence each other in a problem-solving situation. But there's still some questions. It often may sound as though when I say this that I'm suggesting that there is not racism or sexism or classism or homophobic people or misogynistic people or the like. Someone might say, hey, wait a minute. Why shouldn't I use these terms in a debate or in a discussion or in a problem-solving situation? Why shouldn't I describe people and events as they really are? Well, there's many reasons why. One, the most important, is because it doesn't help the problem-solving process. It shames the other and causes defensiveness. We don't change ourselves when we are shamed. It runs the risk of dehumanizing the perhaps dehumanizing other. Yes, the other person that we're interacting with, the person we call racist or sexist, may in fact be dehumanizing other people. But if we dehumanize that person, it's very likely we're not going to be able to have a very constructive outcome to our process. It gets in the way of seeing what lies beneath the other person's offending behavior. So, if the person is engaging in a catcall, we simply call it racism and we call the person out and we shame the person. We're not trying to figure out what motivates the person to do that. And a lot of people will say, I don't care what motivates the sexist, the racist, the classist. I believe we should care. I believe we should care. Even caring about what motivates the person is not the same thing as sanctioning that process. It's necessary if we want to change minds, change hearts, change systems. As a position or interpretation, these statements do not necessarily describe things as they really are. I've given some examples of sexism and racism and stealing, examples of those terms that are ambiguous. And when we use a term as blanket statement, we gloss over so many different nuances that we can much more easily expose if we describe things concretely rather than in abstract and characterizing terms. Here's a question. Why don't we want to talk to a sexist or a racist or a homophobe? Why do we use those terms? Why do we say you're sexist and therefore you should be fired and therefore you're bad and I'm not going to talk to you? You are just immoral. Well, part of the reason is what I just said. That when we say sexism, racism, or homophobe, we immediately cast the other person as immoral, bad, maybe less than human even, maybe evil. And I want to argue that one of the reasons that we don't want to talk to the person who is sexist or racist or homophobic is because we feel polluted by it. We feel contaminated by it. We're afraid that we're going to be in some way judged as being sexist or racist or homophobe simply by associating with the person. So, for example, what do you think of the man on the left? Man in KKK garb. I'm sure that anyone who's not in the KKK was most likely to judge that person very, very negatively. How about the guy on the right, though? He's not in the KKK. He's talking to the guy with the KKK, perhaps accepting a missive from him. What about him? Do you want to go and talk to him? Well, you may want to go yell at him, perhaps. But you don't want to talk to him, I would imagine, if that's so, because you feel in some way contaminated, polluted, or judged. Other people are going to see me the way they see him. Simply talking to him is a problem. Here's a question about contamination. Would you wear Jeffrey Dahmer's jacket? Do you know who Jeffrey Dahmer is? Serial killer. He murdered 17 men and boys. He committed necrophilia, cannibalism. He preserved the body parts of skeletons of his victims. He was not a good person. What if I had his jacket? I said to him, would you wear it? He said, no, I'm not going to wear that jacket. Maybe it's contaminated. No, wait. I've sterilized it. I've dry cleaned it. There's absolutely nothing on it. There's nothing it's just the same as any other jacket, perhaps even cleaner. Will you wear it? A lot of people would feel, myself included, queasy about wearing Jeffrey Dahmer's jacket, even if it's sterile. Why? Because there's a sense of contamination that we feel, a sense of pollution. I suggest that we feel that same sense of pollution when we talk to somebody whose moral position we disdain, that we find that moral position is horrible, and that we feel tainted when we talk to that other person. I think we need to get beyond that. Here's Daryl Davis and a Ku Klux Klan member. Well, what's wrong with this picture? We have a black man and a KKK member standing side by side. Daryl Davis is a remarkable person, in my opinion. He acts by befriending Ku Klux Klan members. He befriends them. He talks to them. He wants to know what's inside of them. He tries to understand why they hate him, even though he has not done anything to them. Why do you hate me? Simply because of the color of my skin. And what he does is he talks to them and he probes in a way that is non-judgmental and curious. Sounds difficult because it is. Here is some excerpts from an interview with Davis on an internet site. It was in 2014, and these are some words that Davis said. He said about King that King had a dream that one day the sons and children of slave owners would sit down to the table with children of former slaves. Isn't that now what I'm doing? I'm trying to bridge that divide. How does he do it? He doesn't go and call them racist. I never set out to convert anybody. I set out to lead by example and to try to find out what gives those people that mindset, black or white. I don't believe in black supremacy. I don't believe in white supremacy. What gives those people that mindset is what he's asking. And the best way to do this is to sit down and talk. Talk with your enemy, because when two enemies are talking, they're not fighting. They may be disagreeing, but as long as they're talking, they're not fighting. It's only when talking ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence. Now, the interviewer talked to Davis about his practice of going to places to talk to KKK members when they have guns. And Davis goes alone, without a gun, without any sort of agenda, if you will. And he says, the interviewer, you wanted to go in and battle them on a mental level as opposed to maybe carrying a firearm that they may have considered a threatening action. So the interviewer was saying, oh, okay, so you don't use a firearm. Your tool or your weapon is a mental weapon to battle them with your thoughts. Well, Davis rejected that. I don't use the term battle because I don't want to battle them. Even though I don't support their beliefs, I went in there to learn from them, to try to gather information, to help me to try to understand. How can you hate me when you don't even know me? Just based on the color of my skin? And to converse with them and hopefully plant a seed, give them some food for thought. And over time, that worked. That's how friendships evolved. Because I gave them something they never had before. They never sat down and had a one-on-one intelligent conversation with a black person. I've never sat down and had a one-on-one conversation with a Klan member. So, we each gained something. And what we found is that most of the times we had more in common than we did in contrast. The only thing that we had in contrast was how we each felt about race. But other than that, we agreed on a lot of things. For example, that we agreed the need to get drugs off the street. We need to get better education for children, things like that. So when you find commonalities and you build on those, then you each realize, you know what? He wants the same thing I want. There's Davis holding a robe that was given to him by a KKK member when he renounced his KKK affiliation. Thanks for listening.